This is the ultimate beginner's guide to photographing birds. What's up, friends? My name is Pi, and welcome to SLR Lounge. This is your place for some nonsense photography education. So look, most of you know that I am a portrait photographer by profession. That is kind of my focus, well, portrait and wedding. I had a chance recently to go out and photograph birds for actually the very first time in my entire life. I was doing a gear review. I was testing out the Tamron 70-300 as well as the new Canon 600mm RF. And I thought, I like to go out and bike, and there's oftentimes lots of birds on the bike trail. So that should be a good subject to use with these telephoto lenses. And indeed it was, but I learned quite a few things in the process. And why am I putting together beginner's guide? Because look, number one, I think every one of you should make it a practice to become a beginner multiple times throughout your life. I'm sorry, I'm very passionate about this, but I like to be a beginner at all points in my life at something. Number two, from that standpoint, you can really effectively help others who are stepping into it because you haven't done it for 10 years. The things that you're learning are things that are like everybody needs to know when they're first stepping into something. So let's go ahead and just stop with the philosophy and jump into number one. Let's talk about starting with the right gear. So the first thing I'm going to say is the right lens is generally going to be a zoom-based kind of telephoto lens. And I would recommend at least a minimum of like 70-200, but honestly, if you can step to something like a 70-300, this is the Tamron 70-300 f4.5 to 6.3 variable aperture lens. So this is a fantastic one. The other one that I was playing with was the fixed focal length, the new Canon 600 RF, which is a fixed f11. So anything like this, but you're gonna want a long lens because obviously the birds are gonna be quite a distance from you, okay? So starting out with a good long lens. If you're wondering which of the two, well, understand that with fixed focal length lenses, you're getting more distance on the 600 RF, obviously, but you're also getting less compositional control. With the 70-300, you're getting half the distance, but you're getting a lot more compositional flexibility. So just think about kind of both sides of that coin. Next, the camera body. So I would highly recommend going with a mirrorless camera. Why is a topic for another video, but I actually paired the 600 RF with the EOS R. It was decent, but pairing the 70-300 with the A7 III, I found Sony's focus system to be quite a bit better. Granted, I wasn't using the R5 or the R6, which are Canon's latest models, and I would imagine that they're going to have much better focus systems. I also think I might need to do a firmware update on my EOS R. But just in general, Sony's AF is really widely regarded as the most advanced, and you're going to see why when you go out to kind of shoot this type of stuff. But with both if you were to go Canon R5, R6, if you were to go Sony, any of these mirrorless bodies, going Nikon, going any of these sides, Z5, Z6, all that kind of stuff, it's going to be good. But you want a body that has good autofocus. You also want a camera body that can have good low light performance, okay? Because with these lenses, you're generally shooting at more closed down apertures, which means even midday, if you're shooting fast moving subjects, you're raising your ISO quite a bit. With an f11 lens, we're shooting around 400 to 800 ISO, even in bright sun. So what I would recommend is on the Canon side, pair your camera up with like an R5 or an R6. On the Sony side, the A7R series would probably be my preferred series for this type of stuff, just because of the extra resolution. It gives me that much more detail that I can then crop into. All right, so that's enough about gear. The only other thing that I would add on the gear side is just keep in mind how you're typically shooting, right? So part of your consideration as to what you're ending up purchasing should go into how it is that you shoot. For example, I like to ride around on my bike, and I have an aero bike, so I don't have a lot of room for anything extra, right? So anything that I carry with me has to go in an aero backpack, which is pretty small. So having, like, say, a single lens with a mirrorless body gives me a very small footprint that I can go out and I can actually carry my small camping chair along with me for shoots like this. So that's kind of the last consideration. Let's go to number 2. What is the ideal time of day to shoot? Obviously, it's going to be sunrise or sunset, so you have kind of direction to the lighting and that kind of stuff. We know this. But I'm going to be honest, I had much better luck shooting early mornings, and I'm going to explain why. Sunrise for me worked out a lot better. Number 1, because there are so many less people out and about. See, I chose to shoot around the Newport Back Bay area, and in the morning, like 6, 7, 8 a.m., there's not a lot of people out. Whereas during sunset, there are tons of people out. They're all off work, they all want to go on rides, and that just means not rides. Where would they go on rides? They want to go on walks and hikes. And that means that your subjects, your animals, your birds, they're going to be scared away much more often. They're very unlikely to get close to you. Number 2, when you're shooting in the morning, I found that I often will get kind of really nice atmospheric elements to my photographs, right? So there's more fog, there's more kind of environmental lighting. I liked all that, especially in the Newport Back Bay area. You get this fog that really makes for beautiful pictures. Okay, so number 3, you get to the location, and I would say choose your background first. So the first thing that I want to consider is kind of, I see a grouping of birds. I want to think about where I want to actually shoot from, because I want to look at what my background would be. So really, this is where we want to clean up our backgrounds, make sure we're shooting from an angle where the background looks good. A lot of the places that I'm shooting really aren't special spots. Like you'll see one is like an aqueduct, the other one, I mean, there's a lot of junk around me. So choosing your background is huge to the types of shots that you're going to get. Number 4, I quickly found that trying to walk after birds don't work. And I'm sure those of you that are more experienced at this than I am are laughing right now. Yeah, chasing birds is not a good idea. So instead, what I found gave me great success was to grab my camping chair. So I have this little tiny portable camping chair that breaks down to about this size. And I would just go set it up at a spot where, like, I know a lot of birds would congregate. It's where they have their relations. And yeah, from that spot, I would just basically chill. And once you're sitting and not moving, the birds would often come really close to me. And if you have, like, you know, breadcrumbs or things that you can kind of throw out, bird safe food, then by all means kind of toss that. But usually I found that, you know, the bread usually only brought like ducks towards me, like the nicer birds. The birds that I wanted to shoot were not interested in bread, most likely because they eat worms and bugs and other things. Again, bird enthusiasts laughing right now. That's okay. I'm fine with that. All right, number 5, let's talk about camera settings. So when shooting birds, obviously they are fast moving subjects. You're gonna wanna think fast shutter speed. Now I prefer shooting manual for everything, and that includes shooting birds. Okay, so I set the camera to 1/2000th of a second, which if you look in the bird photography communities, you will find that this is sort of a sweet spot for shutter speed. Why? Because the shutter speed is fast enough that you can freeze most of the action. A little bit of the action, like birds, their wings that are flapping or something, you might get a little tiny bit of motion there, but it's fast enough that you freeze most of it. Second, you're still getting a little bit more light, right? You could take the shutter speed up to 1/8000th of a second, but then you're getting even less light in. So 1/2000th is kind of this sweet spot in shutter speed where we can kind of maximize detail while getting enough light. Now, depending on the lens, you're gonna be at a certain aperture. So usually I was shooting as wide open as the lens could go. So on this guy, depending on, you know, how far you're zoomed in, it's gonna vary between, what was it, 5 point something or 4 point something, 4 point something all up to 6.3. So that's gonna vary, versus this guy stays at f11 constantly. So this is where I'm generally gonna be shooting wide open, and I'll just be adjusting my ISO to get me to a proper exposure. So on the Canon RF, so on the 600 RF at 1/2000th of a second in bright conditions, I'm still at 800 ISO. This goes back to that camera body notion where, like, hey, look, even in midday sun at 1/2000th of a second in f11, you're gonna be at 400 ISO. So if you start thinking about sunrise, sunset, and those different times at f11 and 1/2000th of a second, you might be at 800, 1600, 3200 ISO to get to the right exposure. So having a more advanced camera body is really gonna benefit you in these cases. But Use 1/2000 of a second for your sweet spot for your shutter speed. Granted, if the birds are holding still and they're just kind of like, you know, walking slow, you could slow it down to 1/500th, 1/1000th in those moments. But I like to keep it fast because we'll talk about it in a second, is anticipating motion. They're gonna get up and fly and do their thing, and you wanna be able to shoot them as they kind of do that. Okay, so tip number 6 is to just make sure that you're keeping an eye on your exposure as light changes. So this happens quite a bit. You know, the sun will go behind clouds, it'll come back out again. Just make sure you're watching your exposure. Number 7, when it comes to composition, I'd recommend that you isolate your subjects, okay? So what worked well for me was kind of really trying to focus in on one bird or one grouping that I really wanted to shoot and clean up the background so I get a really great shot of that one bird, because it's very easy to shoot images that are just too cluttered and the viewer looks at them and kind of just is drawn in this mess of like, what do I focus on? There's so many branches, so much junk going on. So really what we're thinking about is isolating the subject, and again going back to what angle we choose for the background is going to be key there. Next, learn to anticipate movement. Now this takes, I'm sure, years of practice to get down, and I went out for a couple sessions and it was difficult. Granted, even after 2 shoots, I could start kind of recognizing when the birds were flying in, where they were gonna land, and kind of when they were getting ready to take off or fight each other. One bird actually flew in and I started shooting because he was coming in hot. He was like, these guys are in my territory and I don't like this. He came in hot, had his feathers all ruffled up, and I actually got the shot, and it's really cool because you can see like all of his feathers standing up, and there's good detail in these photographs when you stick to these settings. So we can zoom in, you can look through them, and you can see all the detail that you're capturing there. Again, a camera body with higher resolution is another fantastic thing to have here. But anticipate movements. Another thing that I loved doing was I would kind of look at the groupings, and when they would take off, sometimes I could capture like kind of 3 birds all taking off and starting to go in flight at once. And I got really interesting images of these groupings as they would take off to fly or come into land or just fly about. So anticipate the movement, and this is where keeping your shutter speed faster is going to be helpful, because you don't have to make any adjustments. When they start flying, when they start landing, you just focus on shooting and documenting. You kind of keep your settings dialed in the whole time. Last and final bonus tip, learn the names of what the hell you're shooting. Took a lot of pictures of birds that I have no clue what they are. So you guys have seen a lot of the images, maybe you guys can tell me. I learned a few of them after the fact, but talking to your bird photography friends, you'll feel like an idiot when you can't describe an egret or, you know, the Egyptian goose. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I know it's a bit of a departure from our typical kind of portrait focused education, but if y'all enjoyed, please like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you guys can actually see the videos we upload. I would love to see your thoughts in the comments below. You know, what you think about this video, my bird photos, and what content you'd like to see coming up. Meantime, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.